Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. This is Ernst Roots, and let me start once again by thanking you, the listeners or the viewers, for your engagement with this podcast, for your comments, your suggestions. We do make a point of reading those and incorporating what we think would be valuable to this podcast. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and if you would like to support in some other way, you can also click in the link in the description. Now, if you are a regular listener of this podcast, you would know that the Pioneer Podcast is designed particularly to speak to our friends who do not live inside of South Africa about the situation in South Africa at large, but more particularly the situation with the Afrikaner people and the work that we are doing to create a future for our community here in the southern tip of the African continent through the variety of institutions that could collectively be described as the Solidarity Movement. In an earlier episode, I spoke with Flip Buys about the Solidarity Movement, and we mentioned in this discussion also that it's very important to remember that the Solidarity Movement sprouts from a union, a trade union, the union Solidarity, which was previously known as the Mine Workers Union. And today we are here with Dirk Hermann, who is the leader of Solidarity, who is going to talk with us about solidarity and also the Afrikaner worker story. Dirk, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, Dirk, maybe a good way to start, if you can just explain to our listeners, again, when we say union, a lot of people think socialism, Marxism, but that's not what we mean. When we spoke about the union, and we can discuss whether solidarity could still be described as a union. But the question is, what's the difference between the socialist tradition of trade unionism and the solidarity approach?
Well, throughout the world and in history, there were two traditions of trade unions. In the first place, the Christian tradition of trade unions, and then, of course, the socialist tradition of trade unions. The socialist tradition of trade unions is well known in the world at this stage. They believe in a strong centralized state, and then with the responsibility to redistribute, and then everyone will be equal. And that is their ideal. But what people sometimes forget is the strength of the Christian trade union movement. If you look at the Christian trade union movement, you will see there's also two legs. In the first place, the Catholic trade union movement, and then also the Protestant trade union movement. Now, solidarity is more within the Protestant trade union movement, and a core of the Protestant trade union movement is the idea of calling. And if you look at the idea of calling, it means that you take responsibility for your specific calling. So that is why, if you look at the solidarity and the solidarity movement, the idea of self-responsibility is core, and that all comes from the idea of calling. Within the Christian trade union movement, amazing things happened in the past. For instance, the paradox is the trade unionism of Eastern or specifically Central Europe was responsible for the first fall of the communist governments, and Poland is of course the best example. Lech Walesa, he was of course an electrician at a dock. He was a dock worker, and he was responsible at the end of the day for the fall of the communist government in Poland, and he did it from the Christian tradition of trade unionism. And the 1st of May, that is a workers' day all over the world. It is more a socialist day, but in the Catholic environment, and specifically in Poland, at that specific day they think of the fall of the communist government. So what we've done as Solidarity, we've dig into our Protestant past with the whole idea of self-responsibility. But then we've also learned from a Christian trade union, like for instance the Polish trade union. We also even went to look at the Israel trade union movement, the Histadrut, also meaning the movement, and they also believe in the idea that you don't only mobilize the workers, you also mobilize the capital of the workers, and through that they actually establish a de facto state. And later on, from the idea of state within a state, they established a de jure state. We've got some ideas from them, but we also got some ideas from the American trade unions, like for instance the carpenter trade union, that focus on technical training, say that the best thing that we can do for our members is to train them. Some German trade unions, exactly the same in the technical training environment, and we took something of that all. And from that, we built the idea of solidarity. And the idea of solidarity, the central idea, is a federal idea to say self-responsibility on the lowest level possible. Something else than the traditional trade unionism. I think that is the kind of trade unionism in the new information era. If you look, what we do is core to what we do is training and development to make sure that our members are on the forefront of knowledge in the knowledge era.
I want to jump between our history and our past leading up to where we are today, and of course the situation today. And I think one thing that's important historically to understand about the Afrikaner worker story is a lot of people all over the world know about the Boer War or the AngloBu War. And people tend to think that the Afrikaners were farmers. We were typically farmers. But there was an important development during and after the AngloBu War where many of these farmers were suddenly mine workers, and which also led to the creation of solidarity as we know it today, of course, as it was known back then as the Mine Workers Union. Can you just explain that to us?
It was a quite dramatic time at that stage. Yes, of course, there was the AngloBu War. Before the war, the Afrikaners, or the Boers, the farmers, that is why we call the farmers, or the Boers, were just solidly in the agricultural economy. The development of the industrial economy at that stage in South Africa, very slow and dominated by the English. And then came the AngloBu War, partly because of gold and the pressure of the industrial economy on the politics of South Africa. And there was the war. And the dramatic part of that was, of course, the scorched earth policy of the English. So farms were burned down, farmhouses were burned down. The farmers that took part in the war were sent away as soldiers. They came back, and suddenly there was nothing left on the farms. There was the post-war depression, especially there around about 1903, 1904. And then, of course, the disruption of families because of the concentration camps. So it was a dramatic time, real emotional stress, feelings of powerlessness, of loss, and then real poverty among the Boers or the Afrikaners. And suddenly, overnight, they were pushed into the industrial economy, because suddenly the farms could not, because of the scorched earth policy and the post-war depression, the farms could not provide anymore for a whole family. So especially the sons were forced to go to the mines. Quite dramatic for them. At that stage, the average life expectancy of a mine worker was 37 years. And that led to a lot of social disruption among Afrikaners. And that was in that context and environment that we as an institution was born, to protect them in their new, sudden, industrialized environment. So that was something that was more familiar for the English immigrants that came in. They came actually for this kind of opportunities on the mines. We were forced there. And there was a time when we have this relationship between the English migrants and the Afrikaners within what was then called the Transvaal Miners Association. But it must also be seen within a broader context, because after the war, Afrikaners had to make certain decisions. And the most important decision that they had to make is how to rise again. And there was two options. The first option is to do it via the empire. And of course, the empire pushed for that. For instance, they decided on the English-only school policy to make sure that Afrikaners become part of the empire. But Afrikaners made a very important decision then. And it was, no, we will do it ourselves. And then they started with institutions. So we're going to talk about institutions a bit later on. So institutions and self-responsibility beyond the state is a central theme in our history, also in the history of the workers, to take self-responsibility. So there was also other institutions that was formed then, the South African Women's Federation, schools, the trade union, etc. So Afrikaners then decided to take self-responsibility beyond the state.
And so today we have this slogan, Ons sal self, which means we will do it ourselves. But in many ways, this is inspired by the Help Mekaar beweging or the Help Each Other movement, based on some of what you've said now. And this is unfortunately a lesser known part of our history, but it's arguably the most important part, or if not, then at least one of the most important parts. Why was or is solidarity and the solidarity movement so inspired by the Help Mekaar movement or the Help Each Other movement?
Well, it's actually that time, we call it the time between the republics. After the AngloBu War, of course, we've lost the war, we've lost our republics. And then in 1961, a new republic was formed after the National Party took over government in 1948. But that time between, let's say 1948 or 1961, you can choose either. And then after the AngloBu War was a time when we had no republics, of Afrikaner republics. So that was the time of what we call community federalism, where the community took self-responsibility to build a future for them. We also called, especially the time after the First World War, the Help Mekaar movement. We have a time that we called community capitalism, volkskapitalisme, as it's in Afrikaans, so the people's capitalism. And there, through the free market, we stood up as a people. So what we've succeeded is, as a people, to mobilize capital beyond the state, within an unfriendly state environment. So it was a relationship between capital, market, and community. So we then built also financial institutions, and that financial institutions, cultural institutions, especially during the Great Depression of the 1930s, we established even more cultural institutions, and all of this actually created an environment where the community took self-responsibility. And then come 48 and 61, and then the period of apartheid. And then ironically, we've lost that during the period of apartheid, and suddenly we more and more became state-orientated. And we lost a bit of that beyond the state thinking. And in 1997, Flip Buys was elected the General Secretary of the name was then the Mine Workers Union. And then we went back to that origins of the Afrikaners, where the movement was formed, there in the mines, the self-responsibility, the institutions, the Help Mekaar movement, etc. And also back to the Christian idea of calling, inspired also by the Histadrut of Israel, the American trade unions and unions with technical training, Germany, etc. And then we went back to that route, because we knew that after 1997, of 1994 actually, we had to get answers beyond the state. We are a minority, and this minority must get answers. The only way that you can answer a big majoritarian state is through institutions that actually can protect you. Remember, Arends, our dilemma is we are a small minority, but we are a visible minority. We are an overperforming minority, and we are a discredited minority. If we must try to survive as this minority within an aggressive state ideology, without institutions that protect us, then we can't survive Africa.
I would like for you to elaborate a bit on this, what we might even describe as the crisis of the 1990s. You mentioned we were small and discredited, but there was a very important thing that happened in the Afrikaner community. We were so discredited as a result of the apartheid system, and a lot of people don't know that many or perhaps most Afrikaners actually agreed that the system has to end. We need to get to something else. The question was just how do we end it, and how do we move, what would a better system look like? But the issue here is that almost all the Afrikaner institutions collapsed during that time. Many of them because they were in some ways linked to the government, but others just through whatever reasons, whether it's being discredited or and so forth. And Solidarity today is a very big institution. It's one of the most influential institutions in South Africa. And the Solidarity movement have thousands of employees and hundreds of 700,000 members. And it's almost unfathomable to think that that was not at all what it looked like in the 90s. So when we spoke with Flip Bass, I asked him about that, but of course he was very humble. But I would like for you, because you were one of the first people back then to join and to become involved with this building of the movement. What was the situation like for Solidarity or for the Afrikaner workers in the 90s?
Well, we absolutely were in a crisis at this stage. And the crisis was that we were bankrupt in more than one way. In the first place, the old mine workers union was financially bankrupt. Absolutely, we simply did not have any money. And then the second thing is we were also bankrupt in ideas. We carried an old idea of resistance against change just the year before 1994. That defined us, and suddenly the change came. And that was the problem of all the organizations. Afrikaners organizations were either within the shadow of resisting, or the shadow of promoting the change, etc. And then it happened. What now? And it collapsed. The whole Afrikaner household collapsed. Everything, including the mine workers union. And then Flip Bass was elected in 1997. And his first Congress, and I was in a position, it was my first year at the mine workers union as well, and I sat in that Congress. And then Flip said that we must build a movement. Now, that was visionary. Remember, we were literally bankrupt. We had to sell certain, some of our fleet cars to pay salaries. And he said that this bankrupt organization must give an answer to the euphoria out there at that stage of the new South Africa, because the new South Africa is going to collapse. Simply because they carry an ideology of socialism that nowhere in the world could succeed. They have a struggle ideology. They don't have an ideology of government, and they're going to collapse. And we must give an answer. And it was a bit absurd. Here we sit in a bankrupt environment, and the bankrupt environment say that we're going to give an answer, and then we start to build. At that stage, we around about nobody's quite sure exactly how many members, around about 25,000. Why I say we don't know? Because we don't really have good systems. So we started to turn around the trade union with new ideas, the idea of movement, community federalism. We put ourselves against the idea of the central state. And we started to build institutions. And the first institutions is, of course, the Mine Workers Union. And we rebuilt it, rebranded it. In 2001, we launched Solidarity, the name Solidarity. And then we started to build other institutions. We started with a social leg, the Solidarity Helping Hand, and the social legs focus on how to empower students to study. And then we started with a study institution and on the technical side, and at the Saltec small, on a very small scale. Nowadays, Saltec can be seen as one of the best technical colleges in the world. Definitely in South Africa, but in the world. It's an absolutely world-class institution. So the first question that we had to ask is how to finance all of this. So we went to our members. We went to ordinary factory workers, chemical workers, teachers, artisans, etc. And we asked every one of them just to give us 10 rand a month. Just 10 rand a month. And the collective of the 10 rand per month empowered us then to start to build, for instance, a technical college. And then Solidarity then grew, Saltec grew, then we started with the university, academia. Academia, now one of the last remaining Afrikaans universities in South Africa. And we're going to build now a campus of 3 billion rand. One of the biggest university campuses. It all started with 10 rands of ordinary workers. It just started to snowball and snowball. We realized that it's necessary for an answer for your safety in South Africa. We started AfriForum. AfriForum also do great work now on municipal infrastructure. And then we've also realized we must get the answer on the media front. So we started the media company, Marula Media. Marula Media, now the biggest Afrikaans media house in South Africa. And then we realized there's a big problem with schools. And we started the Solidarity School Support Center. And with in the next year or two, we're going to deliver one of the best schools in South Africa with a whole school franchise model that goes with that. And so we start to build institutions. And we even then started to become involved in Urania. And we started the Urania Development Company. The Urania Development Company is to support a new city and region. And so what we thus do now is to put down a community infrastructure and through which we can live. And if we don't do that, then we will not survive Africa. And we are Africans. We can't go anywhere. We can't go back to a mother country or anything like that. And that's our secret weapon. We have no way else to go. We don't have an alternative. And that makes us politically very powerful.
You mentioned the word visionary, and I think this is a very appropriate word. For many reasons, and there are many examples. What you mentioned that during the 90s, there was this euphoria about the new South Africa. Nelson Mandela was the president. And to say during the 90s that we don't foresee that this is going to work was very, very upstream and almost controversial to say something like that. But there are many other examples, and you've mentioned some of them. Academia is a good example. When Academia started as a private Afrikaans higher tertiary institution or higher education institution, the response by many was, why are you doing this? Because there are Afrikaans universities. You can just go to the Afrikaans universities. It's not necessary to start your own thing. And I remember with AfriForum, I was still a student involved with Solidarity and AfriForum at the time. And when AfriForum was founded in 2006, one very influential commentator at the time said, if you can get to the point where you have 10,000 members, that would make you a significant role player. And now AfriForum has more than 300,000 members. So why is this the case? How was it possible for the movement to identify certain things, and you might in a certain say predict what would happen in the future and how we have to prepare for these things when many other people do not see these things?
Well, the fact is that we could, and I must compliment Flip on that, what we can do is we can identify tendencies. We can see, yes, a socialist ideology. We know exactly what happened in the rest of the world with this specific ideology. It will happen again. And then we can see what's going to happen and we can plot it. We know what happens with a centralized idea. We know what happens if the democracy drives a community like everywhere else, so we can see what's going to happen. So the easier thing is just to go and read what happened in the past, to see, to project that to the future. And then you want to realize that you must do the difficult thing. And the thing is, we could try a lot of easier things, but it would not help. We could say, well, let's try to influence universities to say Afrikaans, and we did that. I was, for instance, long on the council of the Northwest University. I tried to influence, but I know the difficult thing is to do it yourself. But that's the only thing, to take self-responsibility. But that's freedom. That's freedom. If you take self-responsibility and you think beyond the state, then suddenly you are free. And that's a kind of freedom that I think must still be explored in the rest of the West. The problem with the West is that we've lost our freedom. We gave our freedom to the state, even Europe, even America. So you see your freedom through a voting process. You try to manage the state, but then you are still dependent on that specific state. Well, we realized it. We are only 5%. So we could not say that let's try to influence the state and then the state will. We were forced to found the idea of real freedom where we as a community can take full responsibility for our future. But the prerequisite of that is thinking beyond the state. And the moment that we realize that, we could go to the factory worker and ask for 10 rand. And the moment that we realize that, we could build institutions through which we can live. And then the paradox of that is, because we can do that, because we can live through our institutions, we can also contribute to the bigger South Africa. So suddenly our members can help to build the country as well. We can have relationships with other communities. Soltec, we train our members there, but they go out and be artisans for the rest of the country. If we did not have Soltec, they would not have been trained and they could not contribute to the country. So that's the paradox here. By making sure that we as a community can live, we can also contribute.
And so I want to bring this back now to solidarity itself and the world of work. You mentioned that solidarity had to redefine itself during the 1990s, but it's almost as if solidarity is doing that same thing again, that the world of trade unionism and the way in which Christian trade unions or all trade unions operated is changing. The world is changing. So how is this applicable to solidarity, and how is solidarity changing?
Well, we are going back to our roots, the root of trade unionism. The problem is trade unions actually became more and more socialist institutions, and socialist institutions say that we must centralize. So what happened was that the world of trade unionists all over the world, especially in South Africa, said that you must be recognized in a specific company to function in that specific company. So it's a centralized idea. So you must organize masses of people, and then you are recognized on a central level, and then you can function. So it's all about majoritarianism. But the word trade union says a union for a trade. So it's a union that you actually form around your specific trade. So we are going back to that. Especially in the European world, there was a long time of where guilds were quite powerful, especially in the Christian guilds were quite powerful. Now that was actually trade unions. It was union around the trade, unity around your trade. So what Solidarity now also started to do is we break away from organizing workers only in the workplace, but we organize them around the trade. So we took that from the old guild model, And it's actually working amazing. So suddenly the people feel and have identity of their specific trait, and we organize them along that specific lines. That's the one big strategic move that we made. The second big strategic move that we make is on the technological front. So we built a platform that was with absolutely only the best technology, and that platform helped to facilitate work between the employer-employees, that helped children to prepare for work, that organize these guilds on the technical level, of a technological level. It also do further training and development. So we develop a whole world of work on a new information platform. So what we did was then go back to the classical idea of trade unionism, bring the technology, and make sure that we train our members with the best training. That's why we have a Soltech, and that's why we plan to build schools, and that's why we have academia. But the important thing is that all of that comes from the Christian idea of trade unionism. If you look at the different Catholic and even especially the Protestant trade unions around the world, you will see mostly all of them have movements around them. The socialist trade unionists, none of them. Their movement is the state. And we started there, and then we applied that, of course, on the bigger community.
So a final question is perhaps a bigger picture question. We've noticed in speaking to our friends abroad that firstly that more and more people in America and Europe and so forth are starting to wake up to the idea that we need to start focusing on South Africa again. There are some lessons that we can learn from South Africa. And a lot of our friends have said to us that we should look at what's happening in South Africa because in many ways it's the future, or it could be the future. Some people have started using the term South Africanization of Europe and of the Western world and so forth. But the question is what lessons do you think could people learn if people reach the conclusion that we should look at South Africa and we should look at what the Afrikaners are doing? What do you think people should learn from our experience?
In the first place, I think they must learn how powerful demographics are. Demographics determines all, and that we've seen in South Africa. And that you can also do if you see what's the demographic tendencies in your specific country, you can know what's going to happen in 20, 30, 40 years. And that is why I think people start to realize, well, that is what's going to happen. Like one parliamentarian in Europe said to me, in his specific country, their biggest threat now is they're going to become a minority in their own land. And the possibility for that is quite big. And how do you deal then if you are a minority in your own country and you are dependent on government? How do you survive then as a cultural community? And so if you look at lessons from South Africa, know that the democracy is going to catch you up. And in the second place, the other lesson that you can learn from South Africa is the story of the Solidarity movement, where we took self-responsibility in a majoritarian environment, and thinking beyond the state brings answers. And that is also, I think South Africa is quite correctly is on the forefront, but the answers as well. We have plans for this crisis, and that is also an example for the rest of the world. We are in Africa, but we are rooted in the West. We are a bit far from the West, but ironically, we are at this stage on the forefront of development of Western ideas. The West, ironically, is moving away from the richdom of the Western idea. We are actually at this stage exploring that again. And so on the base of new thinking about the West applicable for today, we are on the forefront.
Dirk Hermann, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ernst Ritz. If you support this podcast and the work that we are involved with as the Afrikaner Foundation and the broader solidarity movement in South Africa, I want to encourage you to become a more active supporter. You can do this first and foremost by subscribing to our various social media channels, by leaving a comment and sharing what you have seen. But other than that, also by making a small monthly contribution to the work that we are doing through the Afrikaner Foundation's website, or by making a once-off donation. Links in the description.